All right, we've got a few people coming in. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Erica. I'm coming to you from our Green Apple location in the Sunset District of San Francisco. Thank you all for joining us for our event celebrating the US publication of Waterlog by Roger Deakin. Just before we get started, I want to make a few announcements about events we have coming up. Tomorrow, in partnership with Litquake, Green Apple presents Gary Kamaya, John Law, Kimberly Reyes, and Alia Vos for the launch of their new anthology, The End of the Golden Gate, Writers on Loving and Sometimes Leaving San Francisco. That event will be hosted by Litquake at 5 p.m. Pacific time. There is still time for you to register. And Wednesday, bestselling author Carlo Rovelli discusses his latest book, Helgoland, Making Sense of the Quantum Revolution, with George Cam and Daniel Whiteson. That is a ticketed event. You can still get your tickets on Eventbrite. And tonight, we are celebrating the US publication of Waterlog with Craig Popelars from the publisher of Tin House. Craig formerly was the associate publisher of Algonquin Books, where he worked for 25 years. During his time at Algonquin, Craig helped launch and promote many best-selling and critically acclaimed works from authors including Tayari Jones, Julia Alvarez, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and Richard Louv, among others. And we also have with us tonight Bonnie Tsui, who was born in Queens, New York, and raised on Long Island. As her parents met in a swimming pool in Hong Kong, it seemed fitting that she and her brother should then prepare for competitive swimming careers, which lasted a decade. Bonnie lives, swims, and surfs in the Bay Area and is a member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto. Her new book, Why We Swim, was published by Algonquin Books in April 2020. Pete Mulvihill is an avid swimmer, as well as the co-owner of our very own Green Apple Books. And we are also very happy to be joined by Roger Deakin's son, Rufus Deakin. Enjoy the show, everyone. Hand it off to you, Craig.
Hey, thank you, Erica. And thank you, Green Apple Books, for hosting this. We're going to try to keep this maybe a fluid conversation. So we all promised, Bonnie, Pete, Rufus, and I, that we would speak over each other at any moment to keep the conversation going. But really, thank you so much, Green Apple, for hosting this. I also want to thank Peter Fish for his amazing piece in the San Francisco Chronicle. The fact that his last name's Fish and has covered this waterlog journey seems appropriate. And I also want to thank the amazing Tin House staff that brought this very, very special book to the United States, and for Bonnie for writing the amazing introduction for it as well, which is superb. Most of all, I think Pete and I owe a big thanks to our spouses who allowed us and were very concerned about what we were doing. And when we would send pictures back, Pete's wife was like, "That's not what I call safe," on some of our swims. So thank you, Tanya and Sam, for allowing us to have this waterlog journey that culminates tonight with the publication of Waterlog. I thought it would be great if, and I am not an author, not a reader, but to sort of set the stage, read a couple small little passages so you get an idea of Roger Deakin, Waterlog, and why this book has become so special to so many people, both here and abroad. So I will just share with you a couple small little passages. I promise not to read too much, but Roger writes in the beginning, "When you swim, you feel your body for mostly what it is, water, and it begins to move with the water around it. No wonder we feel so much sympathy for beached whales. We are beached at birth ourselves. To swim is to experience how it was before you were born. Once in the water, you are immersed in an intensely private world as you were in the womb. The amniotic waters are both utterly safe and yet terrifying, for at birth, anything could go wrong, and you are assailed by all kinds of unknown forces over which you have no control. This may account for the anxieties every swimmer experiences from time to time in deep water, A swallow dive off a high board into the void is an image that brings together all the contradictions of birth. The swimmer experiences the terror and the bliss of being born. So swimming is a rite of passage, a crossing of boundaries, the line of the shore, the bank of the river, the edge of the pool, the surface itself. When you enter the water, something like metamorphosis happens. You see and experience things when you are swimming in a way that is completely different from any other. You are in nature, part and parcel of it, in a far more complete and intense way than on dry land, and your sense of the presence is overwhelming. In the wild water, you are on equal terms with the animal world around you, in every sense, on the same level. Most of us live in a world where more and more places and things are signposted, labeled, and officially interpreted. There is something about all of this that is turning the reality of things into virtual reality. It is the reason why walking, cycling, and swimming will always be subversive activities. They allow us to regain a sense of what is old and wild in these islands by getting off the beaten track and breaking free of the official version of things. A swimming journey would give me access to that part of the world which, like darkness, mist, woods, or high mountains, still retains most mystery. It would afford me a different perspective on the rest of the landlocked humanity. I love that passage. And I really think that sets the stage. And it reminds me, first and foremost, I think Bonnie and Pete, Rufus, you would agree that Roger was a writer first and foremost, and a swimmer second. And I think that shines on every single page of Waterlog.
It's such a writerly book. I mean, it is also extremely, like, it's so clear in every reference in that book that he read so widely and had so many references and thoughts that would occur to him when he was floating around and swimming in different places, and that curiosity jumps off of each page, which I think is what has animated this book, you know, over the last, was it 22 years that we said today? That and look at this cover. I mean, this new cover is just so gorgeous. And
take the cover off too, huh?
Okay. Shut up.
Still beautiful.
Shiny.
Nice job, Tin House.
That's Diane, our art director.
Right, that you know, I think it's not just about swimming. There's a depth of curiosity about the world, about people, about interacting with the landscape, waterscape, and all of the many stories and years and cultural traditions behind those places. I think that's what was so exciting to me to read that book for the first time. I'd never read anything like that, certainly not, you know, involving swimming. And I think that's why it really informed my writing of Why We Swim, because it was something that Americans, I wouldn't say until fairly recently, were familiar with this kind of exploration. Still aren't really, but in the pandemic have really embraced, you know, wild swimming. Wild swimming, again, is a term that's new to Americans, but has really, you know, it's open water swimming, but it's something that people have embraced in a way that's really different from in the UK, I think.
Very much so.
Bonnie, do you remember who turned you onto the book, or how it got on your radar?
Me?
Yeah.
You know, I think I just was looking around for, you know, I like to see what's out there before I start writing something that I start daring to get into that area. And so it interested me that this book was, you know, by a British author, and also that it had never come here until today, really. But also, of course, there were many international fans, and it kicked off this big movement that started, you know, a sort of like renaissance of wild swimming, you know, over there, but not here. And that I always thought that was kind of weird. Why didn't it happen here in the same way? And I guess, Rufus, I had a question for you about, like, is that fair to say that, you know, because you've lived in both places, you've been in both the UK and in the States, that the sense of, are you permitted to swim anywhere, you know, in a creek or in some random pond or a lake, in the way that Roger so, you know, ebulliently embraces that when he writes about it in the book. It's just not something that, is that something that all Brits do?
The right to roam, right?
Yeah, you have the right to roam, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that land ownership is different here. You know, people don't defend their lands in the same way as they do in America. And there are less firearms, so that makes a big difference in terms of, you know, just walking onto people's land. You don't have fear.
Or at night or early in the morning, yeah.
No, and trespass laws are different. So if you walk across someone's field and you damage their crops in some way, then you just have to offer them a small amount of money to cover that. And certainly, as far as my dad goes, like he was a very, he wasn't really an obeyer of rules in that sense. So he always liked to challenge those rules and to, when he first moved to his house in the countryside, he used to go poaching and stuff on other people's land, and he was a bit naughty. And I remember as a kid we used to go to the local town, which is a town called Dis, in the summer when it was very hot, and we would climb over the gate of the swimming pool, the open air swimming pool, and we would go swimming in there. So he was, and certainly you get that in the book when he talks about all of the rules that he enjoys breaking. And so, yeah, I think that to answer your question, yeah, it's very different in terms of people do go swimming wherever they want, really. Within reason. You can't go into someone's garden and jump in their pool. But yeah.
Well, you brought up, Bonnie, about 22 years, like why over there, where this book has become a classic, a nature writing classic, and has inspired so many people to take up wild swimming, not just in the UK, but throughout Europe. And I think we've been a little slow over here. And it's interesting talking about the origin story of how this book, why it took 22 years to come over this side of the pond. And I just remember, Deakin's name kept showing up in these little articles I would read, and Robert McFarlane would write about him, and Rebecca Mead in the New Yorker. And, the origin story of Pete reaching out, the way it came to us was Pete reaching out, knowing that I was a swimmer, thanks to him, an open water swimmer. My first experience swimming open water was with Pete when he made me swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. But it was interesting to bring this, and it was like, why 22 years for a magical book like this, a beloved nature classic, to come over here? And it was also just very exciting of how we had to go about this. Like, Pete, you bought the British version online, and I did the same thing. You were like, you got to get a copy of this. I got a copy. I passed it on to Maisie Cochran, our editorial director. She fell in love with it. Then we had to go down this wormhole of like, how do we get this over here? And Maisie did an amazing job of sort of swimming through all these channels of agents, and somebody said, you have to talk to the executor of Deakin's estate. And we're like, oh, here we go. How's this going to work out? And to find out that the executor of the estate was Robert McFarlane just absolutely blew our mind. He's one of my literary heroes, and he was more than thrilled for Tin House to bring this book over. So it's exciting to see, almost like your father swam, Rufus. It was just this very strange, long, meandering way to finally get here, and that there was great patience shown throughout the way to finally bring it over here to the States. So, which was very exciting, and for Robert to be a part of this project as well, with his beautiful afterword and his support on all of that. So, but I think Pete bears a lot of responsibility for making that happen, and for an independent bookseller to reach out to an independent publisher and say, hey, I think we've got something here that's special. And Pete knew nature writing, if it's Rebecca Solnit or Robert McFarland or Helen McDonald, this is something I'm very passionate about. It's something passionate for Pete as well. And so it was really wonderful to finally bring it over to the States like this and have you a part of it as well, Bonnie, with that wonderful introduction.
Thank you. Well, I also want to share the funny, like Rufus and I had this like very strange cosmic moment too, because I was editing the intro right before it went to press. And I think maybe, well, the UK version edition of Why We Swim had made it to, I don't know, Rufus, did you hear me on Rich Roll? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Okay. So Rich Roll brought us, Rufus and me together.
Wow.
But I was literally, like I was line editing the first paragraph and where I was saying, oh, Roger, actually, I will read this because it's so nice to be able to read it to you. It's the beginning of the introduction, and it's about, it began with a rainy day in a moat. So that's the beginning of Waterlog, where it starts at this very meditative moment on the estate. And the idea of a long swim through Britain came to Roger Deakin in a period of personal sadness and isolation. The year was 1996. At the age of 53, he found himself alone at the end of a long relationship. Besides that, he missed his son Rufus, who was off surfing and adventuring on the eastern coast of Australia. And I was working on my computer, and I was just sort of like, I want to waste some time, so I'll pick up my phone. And on my phone, I kid you not, Rufus's name showed up. It was like on Instagram, Rufus Deakin. And I said, this is not normal. And I immediately wrote to him and I said, Rufus, this is going to sound very strange and maybe, I don't know, kind of creepy, but I was just writing about you. And it was just this wonderful, till we started corresponding. And, I think that these things happen, all of those sort of sinuous, turns in the way that the creeks and the rivers flow, and sometimes right angles and oxbow back into themselves. I mean, that's kind of the path of this book. And I love that. I love that also that it landed here at a time when I think Americans are and were ready to read it. I mean, people have been so much, again, embracing open water swimming because all the pools closed. All the pools closed for so long, and so many of them are still closed. And so people are just, where can I go? And people have told me that they've gotten into all kinds of waters near them. And I thought, I know that desperation makes you do crazy things, but how awesome is that? And that's very much in the spirit of, Craig, what struck me about that passage you were reading, where you said, where Roger is talking about feeling so close to the land at the level of nature and equivalent to the wild things that are in the water and the creatures on the, on the side of the river. That's not something that many people experience here. I think it's changing. I definitely think it is, but that there's a little bit of courage there, and it's a little bit of like not caring about rules, because here we're very legally, very worried about liability, and so it's just different, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's something. I think when people get a little wild-eyed and desperate, some amazing things kind of happen in good ways sometimes.
I think one of our first swims between Portland and San Francisco was Pete having the audacity to swim Multnomah Falls, which is one of the great nature attractions in this country, one of the biggest waterfalls, and there were no signs that said do not swim, do not cross this. And it felt like, as your father said, Rufus, there's something subversive about this, of like going over a wall. And it was like going over a wall that we're not supposed to. We're looking around, everybody's got their cameras, they're posing in front, they're walking across this amazing bridge looking down, and all of a sudden they see this man wading out into their view, and you could hear, there's somebody in the water, there's somebody in the water. And I was like, this will be interesting to see how this plays out. It was almost like we had to keep the car running. But at the same time, just hearing people's responses, there were people clapping and there were people like, and I think it was this pent up energy that so many of us have under COVID. And then this subversive act where there were no signs, but we also felt afterwards, we're like, Roger would have approved of that. This is exactly what Roger would have wanted. Crawling over these walls, cutting through, ignoring what we think is supposed to happen, and then racing out of there as quickly as possible before anybody showed up to tell us we weren't supposed to do that.
Just quickly, by way of explanation for those who don't already know, that I flew up to Portland last Wednesday, and Craig and I swam our way down to San Francisco, landing yesterday. So just kind of in the spirit of the book, to wash the last year off of ourselves, to reconnect, to celebrate the book, and kind of just to try to give it a try in some ways. So we didn't, and this was not swimming as an athletic achievement. When people would hear you're swimming from Portland to San Francisco, how many miles is that? It's like, we're driving San Francisco, from Portland to San Francisco. But we had we swam waterfalls and oceans and no fens. We didn't find any fens.
We looked for the fens.
We looked.
That's a good word, fens.
Yeah. There was also the word to quiv. And I feel like we did that in Smith Rock Park, where you're just stealthily moving through the water. And we were just, face down, and people are walking along the trail watching these three bodies float down the river face down. And we're watching the fish. People are probably watching us, because you go to Smith Rock Park because of the climbing scene. You're not there for the swimming scene. There's no swimming there really, but we felt like each time we got out of the water, we were like, Roger would approve of that, which was exciting.
Part of the fun, I think, was like getting outside your comfort zone. Like I swim almost exclusively in the San Francisco Bay in the ocean here, and you can't see anything. Like you can't see your hand from 2 feet away. The water's so cloudy, and I get a little, freaked out when I even see fish or anything like that. I'm just not used to cloudy water, and I'm definitely not used to swimming down rapids. On the other hand, Craig and the open ocean is like, oh my God, there are sharks here, and I need to get out immediately. So I got to sort of push my comfort zone by following him, not going first, but following him down some rivers after he made sure that they were safe-ish. And I had to drag him out into last night, China Beach, over to Eagle Rock and back to get him outside his comfort zone. And that little bit of transgressiveness at Multnomah Falls was there's a little extra zing to the swim when you're like, there are signs that say it, but it is definitely not welcoming. There are no steps down to the water from that viewing area. It gave it a little extra fun. A little tickle.
Yeah. What's really interesting about the way Roger approached this book and the experience, and especially in this day and age, is everybody keeps asking us how cold was the weather. And when I posted this on Oregon Wild Swimmers, they kept asking about the temperature and all of this. And Roger never talked about like what the temperature was, what his heart rate was. This was before Strava, before Garmin. He was immersed in it in a way that I think is very hard for a lot of us, because I'll sit there, I think it was after we got out of Bass Lake up on Point Reyes, and I was like, oh, we swam almost 500 yards. And I'm like, the beauty of Roger's writing was, it was about outside the experience. He was chronicling what was happening around him versus that experience where we as people that are in nature are like, oh, on Strava, I just climbed that hill, or I rode my bike faster up the hill than the last 5 people that did it. I've counted my steps and everything like that. And there's something beautiful that Rufus, your dad, did, was he was off the grid. He was finding these places, these secret places, without any kind of, app to help him get from point A to point B. and he never turned it on himself, which I think is what makes a beautiful nature, a really great nature writer, is he immersed himself and he let the experience and what surrounded him tell the story, more so than this is how my body felt, this is the water temp, this, and this, and I went this far. He never said I walked for 5 miles to get to this place. And Pete and I are looking at our watch and it's like, okay, it's a 3-mile hike in, and then it's going to be, let's swim for 45 minutes. And we tried, and there were a couple of places where we were just like, let's just not look at that. And Bass Lake at Point Reyes was when I felt most aligned to the Waterlog experience, by just going, hey, we're here, let's just be here.
Yeah, but you know what he did say? He would say, I think I made a mistake. Which I liked that a lot, where he would just be like, I think I might have walked too long, or I left my stuff somewhere where maybe I shouldn't have left my stuff. And I thought that was, to me, that was just the comedy of life, where you just sort of are mucking around and really messing up sometimes, but just always having and then also his honesty about like sometimes feeling pretty dark or pretty grim, and then always the water lifts him up somehow, washes away, all the metaphors are true, like, and especially in the COVID year plus now, that has so much added resonance. And I just feel that rereading it this year really helped me to understand that. And I saw things that I hadn't seen before, just that attention to what the dipping into the natural world can do for your spirit, through your physical body being in it.
Mm-hmm. Bonnie, can you talk, Andrew Sean Greer brought this up in the San Francisco Chronicle piece, about the similarities between swimming and writing. And not just the fact that it's a solitary act in many ways. You can swim with a group, but when you're in the water, you're still on your own. But can you talk a little bit about that, the writing experience as it relates to swimming? Because there are a lot of writers that
and actually
swimmers.
I found out for while we swim that there are so many. I knew, of course, there were so many writers who were swimmers, but it is interesting to kind of find out, and they're less visible about it. I think it is a quiet, a lot of, what writers are runners. I don't know. They write books about running, like Haruki Murakami, although he's also a swimmer.
That's what I am.
Yeah. Anyway, but I think that for me, and again, I didn't really think about this much until I was working on this book, What Swimming Did for My Brain, that was related to the writing part. I think it depends. Sometimes I will be, the swim is the thing that clears the decks so that I can be quiet, my body can be quiet, and so my mind follows. I think that's something that I've really learned. I'm not twitchy, and so then I can focus on thinking the thoughts, but then sometimes actually thinking the thoughts in the water too. I mean, I think that I used to be so busy with the actual swimming and just like counting the laps or doing a workout, that's its own liberation, right? You're focused on the task at hand, and it's the attention and presentness to the thing, and actually that's liberating too. But I found that swimming now really helps me think about, sometimes when actually I'm thinking about the thing that I'm supposed to be writing. And I think there's like a lot of that, all of the language around thinking thoughts and writing them is very watery. I mean, I think that's very obvious. Like as soon as you start looking for it, you find it. It's like drifting thoughts or floating, this floated by, or I, winding, all of this, the language is just very wonderful and liquidy. And I think that if you are a writer, being in the water itself lends itself to that kind of drifting, floating, connective, because the medium is so unlike anything else. It's just, you're touching it and it's touching everything else, and you feel it on your body. And so I think that's very calming too on your mind. sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask Rufus a question, but go ahead and finish.
Yeah, no, I was, you go.
Okay, well, I don't know. I mean, I've never met Rufus. I don't know too much about you, but I'm just sort of wondering. Obviously, you were off surfing in Australia while your dad started this project, so the salt water runs through your veins as well. I just wonder how much of this was shared experiences, not the book itself and the journey, but growing up with him and swimming.
Yeah, I swam a lot when I was a kid. I was a competitive swimmer in school and stuff. I mean, we always swam. We always went away in the summers. We used to go drive through France, swim in rivers, swim in the Mediterranean down in Spain. One of his great friends was married to a Spanish woman, so we used to go to the north of Spain near Barcelona every year. And there was lots of swimming. We used to go to Greece. Yeah, we swam a lot. Yeah.
It seems like just your dad talks, there are passages in the book that bring up memories for your father. If it's an old girlfriend in one scene, or just a memory of going down to the seaside with his parents. But can you talk a little bit about like the memories that you remember about your dad and any of the swimming? Because obviously when you talk about swimming, everybody has these childhood memories or things that have happened in high school at the swimming hole, or things that went wrong when you got pulled out in an undertow or anything like that. But for some reason, water seems indelibly related to memories, and it seems that way throughout your dad's book as well.
I don't know. I guess I have a memory of us being in France when I must have been about 12, and he had these old Citroen Safari cars, Citroen DSs. I don't know if you know what they are, but he had the Safari versions, which were the sort of station wagon version of them. And he used to have this old, I think it was a sort of World War II parachute that he would throw over the car and leave the trunk open, so it would sort of create this canopy around the car. And we were in the south of France in the Dordogne, I think, which has the Dordogne River that runs through it. It's incredibly beautiful. And we'd gone through, I can't remember which village it was, but he used to drive and drive until it was almost dark and then just find somewhere for us to camp. And we camped alongside the river, sort of a little above it, but we walked down to this little empty beach and caught a fish of some sort. I don't know what it was. But I remember it just being a completely magical experience because the valley was really untouched. Large dog approaching. Yeah, we swam in the river after we ate, and it was this valley where all of the nature seemed completely unfazed by our presence. I guess it was one of those places where not a lot of people were there, and so things didn't appear afraid, or that was at least how it felt to me as a young child. But he always used to inject sort of mystery and sort of magic into experiences as a young child. I think because he lost his dad when he was quite young, he was always, and because I only had limited time with him, he was always aware of sort of trying to make experiences as special as possible, I suppose. And so, yeah, he used to take me to some really wonderful places, and we have magical experiences, I suppose.
Yeah. And did you ever swim in the moat? Obviously, you must have swum in the moat in front of the home.
Yeah, for sure. Well, actually, it's behind the house. It's not in front of the house. Yeah. Because the house is sort of back to front. You approach it from the back, as it were. But the moat when I was young was pretty grotty, to be honest. It was only when we had a little, we had these old tin baths that me and my sort of stepbrother used to float around in. And we used to do horrible things like put cats in them and float them off into the moat. And I did once almost drown in the moat when I was very young, according to my mum, in a scene a bit like that scene at the beginning of Don't Look Now. I don't know if you know that film, but there's a scene where a child dies at the beginning of it, but I plunged into the moat, and my mum had to sort of go in after me. But no, the moat wasn't as attractive as it might appear in the book when I was young. Let's put it like that.
I mean,
But
I
in
don't think
fact-
he ever makes it sound that
I
awesome.
never want to swim there.
Well, it was later. In fact, at the time when he wrote the book, it was really nice because the woman who he had broken up with, that he talks about at the beginning of the book, and that was what, you know, his heartbreak. She had, while they were together, and she had several young children, they had dredged the moat. They had dredged the moat of all of the sort of leaf matter and mud and stuff that was in there for God knows how long, because there were all these amazing little clay pipes and all kinds of, like the old lemonade bottles with glass marbles that ran across the tops of them, and all sorts of stuff. And sort of, I guess, almost 100 years old, was pulled out and laid across the middle field. So then, and the hedge was trimmed, and the moat was kind of beautified.
Mhm.
So there was a
Then it was-
restoration.
It was a restoration. Yeah.
It almost, it must be like some kind of hallowed grounds now for so many people in England, like they want to swim. So
It's a pilgrimage. Yeah.
it
So
has, yeah.
particularly since Dad died, there were an awful lot of people who used to come to the house, and you'd sort of see them peering through the hedgerows, taking photographs. And sort of, some of the braver ones would actually walk down the track and ask if they could swim in the moat, or if they could have a look around the house.
What did you say? What did you say, or what did?
Well, I was always quite friendly. We used to joke because Dad wasn't particularly. He wouldn't have welcomed them with open arms. He was quite, as you know, he enjoyed his privacy. But we were always quite welcoming, and the people who now own the house have always welcomed people and been very generous with their time and with the property, letting people swim, and particularly if people write in advance and stuff like that. But obviously it is a private residence, so it's a little difficult.
I can see all the South End members in the chat planning their excursion.
Yeah, I wouldn't encourage that. I would say definitely write to the owners and ask them whether they might.
I don't think your dad would want us to write anyone to write. He's just like, do it.
Yeah.
Just like en masse,
Yep. Jump and then run. Jump.
The
and
charm of a single man, you know, roaming around into poking his nose into strange waters is a little different from like 1,000 of them. Kind of
I'm sure.
saying it's a little.
Rufus, in this company, not going to call anyone out, but your dad had no problem with wearing a wetsuit. While some people whose names might rhyme with me, Mulvihill, have issues with the whole wetsuit. But your dad sort of explained it. Well, the otter pretty much has its own wetsuit to keep itself warm. Where do you stand on the wetsuit versus the non-wetsuit in swimming in open water?
Well, for swimming, I never wear a wetsuit for swimming. I surf in a wetsuit, but I would never swim in a wetsuit. I like cold water, but that's just me. Yeah. And I don't like the sort of constriction of wearing a wetsuit when you swim.
Greg, you have to let me read the paragraph then, okay?
I will, sure.
The problem about wearing a wetsuit is sensory deprivation. It is a species of whole body condom. Of course, there are people who like rubber. They enjoy the feel of it. They may even find it pleasing. But there is no getting away from the fact that a wetsuit is an anesthetic to prevent you from experiencing the full force of your physical encounter with cold water. And in that sense, it is against nature and something of a killjoy. On the other hand, I tell myself each time I struggle into the rubber, not a drop of water ever actually reaches the skin of the otter. Its outer fur traps air in an insulating layer, very like a wetsuit, and the inner fur is so fine and tight together that the water never penetrates it. So if otters are allowed what amounts to a dry suit, I reckon I could permit myself the occasional judicious use of the wetsuit to bolster my chances of survival. It can make a long swim in cold water bearable, even comfortable, but it cannot approach the sensuality of swimming in your own skin.
Craig, I think you misremembered some stuff.
Yeah, a little bit. Your dad would,
Well done.
But your dad would even like skip the bathing suit altogether in some of the
Oh yeah,
scenes.
yeah. And yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely a fan of that as well. I mean, if you want the full experience, then you should definitely go in
The full
your
Monty
birthday suit.
experience.
Too many cameras at Multnomah Falls for that.
Exactly.
Not
Yeah,
that
your dad didn't have Instagram and TikTok back then to capture all
But
that.
I did get Craig out of his wetsuit once. We swam in 13 different bodies of water, I think.
Yeah.
And I did get him out in Lake Siskiyou. Craig, you want to describe that experience?
That was all right. That was surprisingly not bad. And I will say this, it was because Pete got tired of how long it would take for me to get in and out of the wetsuit that he just berated me. He's like, you in that goddamn wetsuit, you're in the water for 10 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, who are you? And it was just, so it was a shaming.
You got out of your wetsuit when we were in Tamales.
I did. And again, I felt like I had to prove something to Bonnie because Bonnie, and this is why the whole healing thing, Bonnie breaks 2 ribs surfing, 3 weeks ago?
4 weeks ago.
4 weeks ago. And it was basically, I'll swim with you guys in Tamales Bay, but I think I'll just float around. And you got in there and you swam. And
I was reborn,
you were. And then it was just like, let's have that beer afterwards.
I was like,
so
see you later.
on the
I'm
beaches. But it definitely proved that there's something healing about water.
Oh gosh, it felt so good.
Yeah. So I think it was seeing you swim with 2 broken ribs. I'm like, okay, I can get over Tamales Bay. And I think it was the eelgrass was the creepiest part of it because we were constantly just covered in eelgrass swimming in Tamales Bay.
I think I'm still finding it in weird places.
Yeah.
It's often in my watch that I went swimming was there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we take some of these questions that are popping up in the Q&A?
Yeah. I think Erica was going to jump on and help out with the Q&A.
But she's not. Yeah, let's see if she's
There.
back. All right.
Hello.
Hello.
So our first question from an anonymous viewer is, how did you all personally deal with both acclimating to the lower temperatures and currents in open water and the cold hard fact that in the water, you're no longer at the top of the food chain?
Yeah. Who wants to take this?
Pete, you've been acclimated for quite some time.
For sure.
Like I was never trained as a swimmer. I was always comfortable in the water, but and still can't really swim properly or efficiently. But at a Green Apple Christmas party, my colleague EH said, "Hey, what I've always wanted to do is swim from Alcatraz." I said, "What? People die doing that. Like there's sharks." And he said, "No, lots of people do it. We can do it." So the next week I went down there in January and was like, "All right, we can do this." And I said, "Don't we need wetsuits?" He said, "No. It's cold, but you get used to it." So I got in up to maybe my ankles before I decided that was enough. And then my wife hectored me. We had just gone down there. She was pregnant with twins, and it was kind of an affair to find parking. And so she just said, like, "Come on, at least swim to that buoy and back." And it was really painful. And then I realized how different the water temperature was in January than it is in September. So I waited a couple months, and then I just went back, and you just kind of swim a little more and a little more each day. Obviously, swimming with somebody else is a good idea. There's all these great safety protocols, and talking to other people who do it. Just the way before Craig swam down the Deschutes River over the rapids, we talked to some people and said, "What's this like, and how do I eddy out," and that kind of thing. So, I think you just kind of do it and slowly build tolerance. So that's my short version.
The most important question is this a bad idea? To someone who has been standing there a while, maybe who has seen some things. I think that Pete has it nailed, which is slowly, a little bit at a time, and then have a buddy.
Yeah. I think, Roger would always scout things out before he jumped into it. And I think it was when we swam the Rogue, he was like, "Really?"
Rufus looks a little.
He did, because he had to drop his stuff at the bottom of the river and then hike up. So he saw what he was going to swim in a lot of cases, but he never did it with it. He never did it with a buddy. There was no cell phone. So if anything happened, it was going to happen. But I think we took a lot of safe measures. The Rogue was a little bit swimming that's a wild and scenic river. And the current was incredibly fast. And we knew that we had to eddy out because right below where we eddied out, it turned into like class 4. And I forget what the waterfall was. And it was like, okay, yeah, let's play it safe. We can do this, ride it for a little while, but we've got to eddy out at this point.
So Craig loves that one because the current makes him look so fast. Flying down the river.
But that comfort level,
and,
you know,
I set the guy with the wetsuit first, you know, like if somebody's going to get soaked up and beat up, at least he'll be warm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your comfort level in the outside of the Golden Gate, as you know, last night, that's not my jam. I felt very, very, you guys do this with such great confidence. You know, the gang that joined us last night, your pod, they're just out there doing it. And for me, I'm thinking of everything I've seen since 1976. It doesn't help that I watch Jaws every single year and read books like The Devil's Teeth. And, you know, Susan Casey's book did not help swimming in that area.
There have been 10 deaths by shark in California history that have been recorded. And the only one in San Francisco was about a half a mile from there. So good instinct.
Sure.
What else, Erica?
Next one is, let's see. In Florida, the joy of wild swimming is encroached on by algae blooms, red tide, and the Trumpian boat parades. What is your long-term perspective on how global warming will impact wild swimming?
You know, Rufus, your dad was such an environmentalist and a conservationist. And that's just one of the beauties about his experience and what he did beyond the book with conservation and environmentalism. I think, you know, what we saw along the way, you know, we saw some sad places that really, really upset us when we drove along the McKenzie River after we did the Tamlich Blue Pool. It was devastated because of the wildfires. And you knew that it wasn't just the wildfires, but the hillsides along the river were going to erode into the river, creating sediments. And it was just going to compound and compound and compound. And we saw that. And then when we passed Shasta Lake, and just to see how empty it was incredibly sad. So you're looking at drought, you're looking at wildfires, you're looking at the algae blooms in Florida, and just, you know, building where we shouldn't be building. And that, you know, water is, you know, the single most important resource that we all have. And there's a lot of great work that's happening to bring these streams and rivers back, with dams coming down and everything like that. But you just wonder if we're past that tipping point in a lot of places. Runoffs from golf courses with the fertilizers and pesticides and everything like that. It's really disheartening. But I think the more people that are getting out in the environment, if it's the national parks, taking kids hiking, that you're going to be more inclined to want to preserve that. But it is incredibly sad to see what's happening to the, you know, the coral reefs around the world. But then there's a lot of great work that's being done to try to preserve it. It's just, we're in a race right now, and we're losing a lot.
Okay, we also have Michael L. wondering, other than Bonnie's introduction, are there content differences between the original publication and the new US edition of Waterlog?
Robert McFarlane's afterword is absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And to have it bookend with Bonnie being an American writer and introducing it in such a thoughtful, thoughtful way to a new audience over here. And then for Robert, with his relationship to your dad, Rufus, and just being able to create that perspective of why this book is so meaningful and important. Just to have two really wonderful writers bookending the book, I just think makes it really, really special. We didn't change anything on the inside, Pete. We're going to call them lorries, and we didn't change it to trucks or anything like that. We were joking about that all the way down of like the American version, but you know, it's incredibly British. Peter Fish brought that up, and we know this is like there's some parts of the reader over here in the US is going to say, wow, this is really British. But when you get down to it, that experience in the natural world is what really really drives the book.
When you want those parts to stay, right? You want
Yeah.
that language and the
Yeah.
and the references, and because it is a swimmer's journey through Britain, it is of the place inextricably, and he is of the place inextricably, and all of the. But you know, like you said, the residences now are just really. It's a good time for it here, I think.
Next, we have from an anonymous asker, what's the personal feeling or balance between the Deakins and Lynn Cox's view of open water swimming versus the Diane Nyad model of testing the limits of human endurance?
Pete, you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know enough about any of the three of them. I mean, I kind of know what they've been up to. And to me, you know, like that whole idea of swimming from Portland to San Francisco, that's the Diane Nyad version. Like, what is possible? And let's push that limit. And Lynn Cox, you know, I feel like, you know, one of her first big swims was from the US to Russia, and that was about building bridges where there aren't any. And I feel like the Waterlog is a little more. It's both a very personal journey. You know, as mentioned, he was alone for most of it, but he also did meet people and fall into crowds and end up at the pub at night talking to locals or getting help. There's one piece where he's trying to swim across a harbor mouth, I think, and
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was just going to test it out to see if the tide was right. And then decided, oh, I'm halfway across, let's go. And the Coast Guard rolls up on him and says, you know, are you okay? He says, yes, I'm fine. As if, you know, nothing to see here. And they said, you know, turn around and go back. And he said, well, I'm already halfway across, so it's kind of the same distance, right? And they didn't know. So he went back, and of course, the next day he found somebody who would escort him in a boat, so he could kind of hide in the wake of the boat or hide on the side of the boat to make it across. So you know, there were other interactions with other people and community there, which is kind of, for me, a lot of what kept me in the water, I think, was the community I found at the south end of oddballs and misfits and adventuresome people. And there are people that, you know, try to swim from the Farallones 26 miles back to San Francisco, and there are people that celebrate the fact that they swam 100 yards to the flag and back 1,000 times. And so, you know, there's both that solo aspect to it and the nature aspect to it, but then also the community and the people you meet. So I feel like it's a little different than both Diana Nyad and Lynn Cox. It's its own thing.
Thank you, Pete. How would you all recommend that we advocate for expanding wild swimming in our communities without circumventing the thrill of illicit dips?
Well, you know, with the whole right to roam thing, that did remind me of, you know, in this country, that you're supposed to have coastal access. You know, even if you're in a stretch of beachfront property where you've got millionaire's mansion, or now it's billionaire's mansion, but you know, just mansions that you're always going to have public coastal access, the right to get to that beach, and there's no such thing as private beach. You're supposed to be able to go up to the high tide at any point in time, always to, you know, come up ashore. And then also with rivers and other waterways like that, there's the oh gosh, I can't remember this doctrine now, but it's like there's something about if it's a navigable river, you should be able to swim and also stop, you know, at any beach. But of course, that's subject to interpretation, and here where people are very concerned about property, you know, and ownership of land, that's problematic. And so I don't know. I think it would be nice if it started to be more of a thing that people did, so that it didn't seem as, you know, that people regularly saw Pete at Multnomah Falls swimming around in there and maybe started trying that. And that I don't know, but you know, then there's also the question of, once you start doing that, when does it become a problem of numbers and still keeping those natural places protected or caring for them, right? So that when you're coming in to do that you're not leaving trash everywhere. I mean, that's always, we just do that. We tend to do that, and I don't really have an answer for that, but I would love to see it more normalized to be doing that kind of swimming.
Thank you, Bonnie. I think a good question for us to close out with is, how is swimming different for you from other ways of getting into nature, hiking or backpacking, for example?
That's you, Craig. You're the mountaineer.
I think Bonnie, Pete, and I were talking about this a couple of days after our swim at Tamales Bay, that there's something about when you're surfing, when you're swimming, you're in a different environment and you are in the here and now. There's nothing, you're not thinking about work, you're not thinking about home, you're not thinking about walking the dog or anything like that. I think when I mountain bike or when I go out for a trail run, I can still think about my to-do list at home or at work. I can't do that when I'm swimming. And I think it's because it's such a different experience that it's a different world in many ways. And Roger brought that up so beautifully in many passages of the book, that you are in the moment. And I can't think of another experience. You know, you're not going to get that with hiking or anything. You can be immersed in it, but there is something about being in water that allows you only to be in water. There's no to-do list when you're surfing or swimming or just floating on your back, you know.
What about you, Rufus? I feel like you should have the last word.
Yeah.
I think it's ethereal. I think it's the only one of those things that has a sort of indescribable feeling to it. I think, you know, obviously you're floating, you're weightless, but it's just, it's magical, is how I would describe it. And as Craig said, it is a very different feeling to any of the other things. You are so, kind of lost in it, I suppose.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our evening here. Thank you to Craig, Bonnie, Rufus, and Pete for sharing this experience. You can get Waterlog both in store at Green Apple Books and online at greenapplebooks.com. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Happy reading and happy swimming.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rufus.
That was
Pleasure.